Google's Pixel smartphones are the smartest of them all, so why is it that they're so misunderstood, and why is it that no one has cared about them? Let's talk about that. The Pixel series has come a long way since its debut in October of 2016. We've had a whole host of different form factors, price brackets, performance classes, and it seemed at one point that Google really didn't know what a Pixel was meant to look like. So today I'm going to go back through the series history and tell you why this might be the right time to pick up a Pixel, because it's very possible that Google's vision for what a Pixel should be is coming to fruition. Up until 2017, Google kind of had its own smartphone line, but it was also in partnership with big brands that we come to know, like LG, HTC, Motorola, Huawei and Samsung. These devices came in all shapes and sizes, with the one constant being Google's stock Android experience, which was a big departure from the feature-heavy, slow and bogged down software that a lot of these big brands were putting on their normal phones at the time. In 2017, however, Google launched its own branded phone called the Pixel. This wasn't just a Googleified phone from a big brand, it was designed to be made for Google's software. And boy did the software play a big part. The original design was pretty ugly, though it had its charm, and while the devices had good performance and screen specifications, they didn't exactly scream premium hardware from a camera or battery point of view. The phone wanted to wow with its magic-like software trickery, from the integrated Google Assistant to the wonderful HDR+ photos that really did a good job with such a small sensor. It also joked about having the headphone port and briskly removed that for the next release, but we'll gloss over that. The next year's phone was an even better model with more modern looking designs, stereo front firing speakers, I'm sure they put those in to make up for the fact they removed the headphone port, but there we go, and upgraded performance components. But it still maintained that software-focused theme, as nothing really stood out as class-topping in the hardware department. Though we did get Squeeze for Assistant, which allowed you to push on the sides of the phone to pull up Google's voice command system, and the phone felt more like a competitor in the space compared to the Pilot, even if Google wasn't shifting loads of units just yet. The Pixel 3 series did change more of the hardware, but in a slightly more controversial way. The range-topping XL model incorporated a bathtub-style notch to house its dual selfie cameras, one of these being an ultra-wide. This meant taking photos with friends was a lot easier, but it did leave a heck of a mark on the otherwise pretty nice design. The back was now fully glass, the bezels minimised, and the thing felt more premium because of this, but Google held on to the same main camera sensor that it had been using in previous phones, and when other companies started experimenting with larger and actually more sensors, one felt a little bit boring. That said, the Pixel 3 series still tops the camera charts because the software magic was just so good. This was a generation where Google launched the A series, a cut-down model with plastic body and a lower-end performance specification to get people using Google's Pixels at a lower price point. This was actually rather well received by critics, thanks to its lack of notch, its inclusion of the headphone port once again, and it really did what it set out to do, which was get a few more pixels in people's pockets. Up until now, Google hadn't been shipping many devices, especially compared to Samsung, Apple and Huawei, but it was still quite early in the line's lifespan, so people were still trying to work out what a Pixel was. The Pixel 4 definitely didn't help things. It was much of an oddball because it changed up the design and added cameras, RAM and a high refresh rate display, so I'm sure you're all thinking, well, that's a good thing, right? Well, not so much. The smaller variant had a tiny battery, making battery life a nightmare. The asymmetrical bezel shifted the visual balance, so it looked a little bit off, and Google's idea for Project Solly, a radar-based gesture and face recognition system, didn't work nearly as well as people would have liked. And actually, that wouldn't have been so bad had it not drained the battery like absolute crazy when it was enabled, and didn't even have a fingerprint scanner to back up that facial recognition system. Add in the price increases across the range and the fact that Google dropped its bundled in unlimited original quality photo cloud storage, and the Pixel 4 just felt like an awkward sidestep. Not that I can say the same about the 4a, actually this device was quite good. It was strangely more practical than the mainline phone of this generation. It had a normal design with a normal fingerprint scanner on the back, and it cost just $349. However, the Snapdragon 730G processor could be a bit of a problem at times because it wasn't that powerful, and given the phones that would release not long after it, the only reason you would really buy one of these is if you had a really strict budget. The Pixel 5 was arguably more confusing than the 4. It took mid-range specifications for the first time in the mainline history, a pretty small screen, a plastic-coated metal body, and put a hefty $699 price tag on it. That was enough for many to completely disregard the device because it's kind of a mid-ranger at a flagship price point during the pandemic when no one had any money, and Google still hadn't grown its brand to really feel like it was competing with the iPhones and the Samsung Galaxies. It was a rough smartphone for a rough time period. Especially given that the Pixel 4a 5G, which was released at the same time as the 5, was essentially just a bigger 5 with a lesser display, 2 fewer gigabytes of memory, and lacked wireless charging, for considerably less money. In pretty much every other way it was the same. It had the same processor, very similar camera hardware, even came with a headphone port as well, which the 5 didn't have. This one was a real head scratcher at the time. Google opted to only release the Pixel 5a in the US and Japan. It was very similar to the 4a, just with a slightly different display, a bigger battery, and adjusted color hue to the chassis design. Really, the 5a seems to be the last phone where the company was fully experimenting, and I call this sort of the Wild West era of the Pixel. Its direction was all over the place, and it was very confusing to many people. Why would you spend as much as an iPhone if you got something that looked and sounded cheap? Like, it didn't make any sense. The next Pixel though, you guessed it, was the Pixel 6, and this was a clear turning point for the Pixel brand. Not only did this generation of phone receive a complete overhaul in its external design, but its entire philosophy and direction shifted from its predecessors. This phone was decidedly more upmarket, and Google clearly designed this to compete with Apple and Samsung at the high end. Leave the A series for the budget conscious and just pack all you can into the mainline. And with that, we were treated to big, pretty displays, huge camera sensors compared to the previous phones, even a periscope zoom lens for taking long-range shots, and Google's own Tensor system on chips that gave the company control over what the phone was capable of from the ground up. This was the firm's first attempt at anything like this, and it showed. There were bugs, slowdowns, heat management issues, and the overall feeling that the Tensor G1 just couldn't hold a candle to the Snapdragons and Bionics of this generation. But what it did do is show that Google was serious about its hardware, when we all thought that it only really focused on software. The Pixel 6a was a very similar device to the mainline. It looked very similar, you also had the same processor, albeit with 2 fewer gigabytes of RAM compared to the 6, but Google compromised in areas that it felt like it could handle with the use of a glass-like plastic back, lesser camera sensors, and a smaller 60Hz display compared to the 90 and 120Hz units in the 6 and 6 Pro respectively. Although that last change seems to hit a nerve with a lot of tech fans, the 6a was built for the people, not for the enthusiast. Google's marketing also saw a shift, with TV ads now showing off the crazy software trickery like Magic Eraser and astrophotography modes, instead of talking just about the hardware. The company was convincing you your life would be better with a Pixel, not just that the Pixel is a good phone. Google very much followed the formula it had set when it came to the Pixel 7 series. These devices looked and felt very similar to the 6, but with lots of little refinements that made the phones feel much less like first-gen products. A revised design came in with a metal camera bar instead of the glass visor, smoother metal to glass transitions in the physical design, upgraded camera sensors here and there, and of course the second generation of Google's Tensor processor. This particular upgrade was a marked improvement over the last generation. Sure, it didn't match up to Qualcomm or Apple's processors still in terms of graphics performance, but there were definite improvements to stability, whether we're talking about battery life, cell signal, just daily usage. It all felt a lot better, even if on paper it didn't look too different. Which is of course the same processor found in the Pixel 7a as well. This newer chip actually makes the 7a one of the best, if not the best cheap phone you can buy worldwide. Google bumped the price by $50, which came with its own backlash, but actually you were getting such a significant improvement in terms of user experience, even if the specs on paper seemed the same, that it seemed to be worth it. Foldables are in, and Google's model didn't exactly hit the ground running. Compared to the class-leading Samsung foldables, Google's Pixel Fold looked less elegant, cost an eye-watering amount of money for a phone that wasn't made by Apple or Samsung, and the software running on it really wasn't well adapted for the larger internal display. It's not a bad phone by any means, especially given it's a first generation product, and to be fair, it does follow the same direction as the mainline phones. It's just that Samsung has this market in the palm of its hands, and that's a tough nut to crack. Which of course brings us to the Pixel 8 series. This device clearly takes what made the Pixel 7 great and builds on it with improved cameras, dramatically better displays, and slightly more efficient cooling for the new Tensor G3 chip inside. Google has tweaked the ergonomics and adjusted the design to be more pleasant in your hand and in your pocket. Battery life is still a concern, as is the inflated price on these newer generation models, but this phone cements what a Pixel mainline smartphone is meant to be. An iPhone and Samsung Galaxy S competitor with a heavy lean into the high-end pricing category. Stay tuned for our Pixel 8 coverage coming very soon, by the way. Google spent 5 generations making phones that people didn't fully understand, and I'm not sure Google itself really understood what the Pixel was meant to be until it released the 6. From the 6 and 6 Pro onwards, we've seen more consistent designs, hardware packages, and more importantly, we've been able to see the direction that the company is heading in with its Pixel line. Consumers are starting to understand that this is a premium product and that they should perhaps consider one over a Galaxy or an iPhone, especially with the firm's aggressive push to promise 7 years of software updates in its latest releases. Google still has a long way to go if it wants to compete on the market share front, and I'm not sure they'll even ever get there, but we're all finally understanding what the Pixel is meant to be, and that can only be a good thing going forward. Alright guys, thanks for watching today's video. Let me know in the comments what your favourite Pixel device is. I'm a sucker for the 2XL personally, but the 8 is looking very promising, so hopefully that delivers on its promises. Hit like and subscribe if you're new around here to never miss a video like this one. I've been Ryan Thomas with Android Police, and I'll catch you later. Cheers.